8 minutes after a deep-sea earthquake, an impossible tower rose from the middle of the Atlantic. No gate had opened, no warning had appeared, and even the Hero Association had no idea how anyone was supposed to enter it. Across the world, strange colored tickets had already begun to surface. Most people saw them as mysterious loot. Kim Hajin knew they were invitations to the Tower of Wish, and that one color was worth far more than all the others. But before Hajin could claim that ticket, 3 years of separation had to reach their end. Old friends would return, forgotten promises would resurface, and Fenrir would step back into the light. At Sacred Grace of the Creator, Yoon Sung-ah placed 2 official applications in front of Kim Suho and Yoo Yeonha. The starting salary was 400 million won, more than twice what most Cube graduates received, and Yoo Yeonha's face brightened immediately. Kim Suho reacted differently. Sacred Grace was buried under compensation costs from its failed tower campaign, and the guild would need to clear roughly 30 small dungeons just to recover. The generous offer did not reassure him. It made him wonder how desperate Yoon Sung-ah had become. Yoon Sung-ah misunderstood his silence and apologized for not offering more. In truth, part of the salary would come from her own pocket. Suho accepted without injuring her pride, while Yoo Yeonha signed with no hesitation. Once they left, the guild leader was alone with the number that haunted her, 5 billion won in debt. She had once possessed that much as personal wealth. Now she called Aileen, swallowed the last of her pride, and finally asked, "Can you lend me some money?" Sacred Grace was fighting to survive. Outside that office, the entire world was changing just as quickly. In June of 2028, the Silver Moon phenomenon drove monsters across the world into a frenzy. Governments declared emergencies and ordered guilds to destroy monster habitats before the outbreaks became permanent. Kim Suho destroyed the Blood Bear settlement in the Suwon Mountains and became the youngest intermediate rank hero. Shin Jonghak soon achieved the same promotion, proving that the former Cube cadets were already becoming major figures. By August, Essence of the Strait had opened 2 advanced facilities for dismantling monster corpses and refining mana crystals. The project linked Yoo Yeonha's guild with Park Soo-yuk's SH agency, giving them a steady supply of monster materials, including everything Fenrir killed. The crisis worsened in October when airborne and marine monsters multiplied. Kyushu and parts of the British Isles became danger zones. Japan requested foreign support, while Britain chose to recruit mercenaries and was mocked for trying to handle the disaster without surrendering control to the Hero Association. Then, in February of 2029, the story returned to Mount Baekdu. There, one former cadet was preparing to leave the isolation that had made her stronger. For Chae Nayun, the final test was not about whether she could win. It was about whether she was ready to return. Steel-like wind swept across Mount Baekdu as Chae Nayun faced the instructor who had trained her for 2 years. The spectators protected themselves with reinforcement chi, but Nayun stood in the center, with every muscle drawn tight around Highlander, her 1.8-meter claymore. At the signal, she did not charge. She swung from a distance, extending the blade into a 20-meter arc. Her opponent blocked it and rushed forward, only for Nayun to leap high enough to vanish into the clouds above him. Her descending strike looked simple, almost suspiciously simple. The instructor dodged it, but the plunge was only bait. With Highlander buried in the ground, Nayun twisted the sword 90 degrees and released the attack she had hidden until that moment. The mountains split. Pillars of magical power shaped like enormous swords erupted across the arena and hurled the instructor away. The fight ended in 3 breaths, and the judge declared Chae Nayun the winner. Yoo Si-yuk was proud and reluctant. Nayun was only 21, yet she had surpassed the man who taught her. When he told her she was ready to return to the secular world, both of them understood that strength was not the only reason she was leaving. Nayun still carried an old grudge and an unpaid debt. Even so, She refused the life of a mercenary and chose to join a guild. Becoming a hero had been her dream, and she would not abandon it merely because one man had changed her life. Her body was ready to move forward. Her heart, however, had built a ritual to make sure it never forgot the past. Back in her room, Nayun packed the few belongings she had brought to Mount Baekdu. Then she noticed the cigarettes on her desk and lit one, only to cough at the bitter taste she still could not endure. She smoked exactly 3 times a day, not because she enjoyed it, but because she believed disgust could preserve memory. The smell reminded her not to soften, not to let time erase what had happened, and not to forgive without meaning to. While looking around the room, she found an old virtual reality helmet. It still worked, and the game inside, Gladiator of the Century, was entering its final day of service. Nayun entered only to revisit an old memory. Then she opened her friend list and saw one name still online, Extra 7. Neither of them knew that the person behind the other username was someone they had already lost in the real world. Elsewhere, Kim Hajin was also unable to sleep. His laptop update was still unfinished. The next major event he remembered had not yet begun, and insomnia had left him with too much time to think. When he saw his own old headset, he logged into the same dying game. A message appeared from Yoo Yeonha, the young player who had once treated Extra 7 as a master. The wording was more mature than Hajin remembered, but the reunion pleased him enough to drive away his sleepiness. They agreed to one final match. Hajin even relogged after improving his headset, unwilling to lose too easily to his former student. That confidence lasted until Yoo Yeonha trapped him in a 108-hit aerial combo and destroyed him in the first set. Hajin took the second set seriously, changed to a longsword, and won by the narrowest margin. Both players claimed they had stopped playing years ago. Each came away impressed by how much the other had changed. Their conversation turned toward the future. Nayun Jajangman said she would soon become active and wondered whether they might meet someday. Hajin, still believing she was only an unknown trainee, told her it might happen if she kept working hard. With 30 seconds left, Hajin typed, "Good luck." "Be happy," Nayun answered at once. "It is already too late for me, but you should be happy too, Hyungnim." Hajin tried to reply, but the world vanished before his message could be sent. The final screen simply thanked the players and said goodbye. Neither Hajin nor Nayun realized they had just spoken to each other for the first time in 3 years. A month later, Hajin was still waiting for the next event, but the quiet life he had built inside the Chameleon Troupe was about to connect him with another old friend. On April 3rd, 2029, Hajin rested in the Chameleon Troupe's hideout beneath the Bristol Channel. The cave was only 65% complete, yet it had already become almost luxurious. Crystal lights, vintage red walls, artwork from Boss's vault, hot springs, a shooting range, a library, a game room, and a goblin coffee shop. Boss played a game on the sofa while Hajin read newspapers and waited for any mention of the admission tickets. Then, Chuk Jung-young burst through the door carrying a blue ocean fish twice the size of his body. Delighted that the sea monsters outside had become more violent, the fish immediately caught Boss's attention. Hajin had secretly begun cooking for her 3 months earlier, using food and hairbrushing to make himself indispensable. When Boss asked when breakfast would be ready, her calm authority vanished behind open anticipation. After Chiak drained a 2-liter Americano in 3 seconds and left to fight more sea monsters, Hajin checked Violet Banquet. The most popular article mocked Fenrir for disappearing for 6 months. One familiar account defended him in the comments. Rachel argued that mercenaries were not obligated to work for free and blamed the critics for driving Fenrir away. Hajin laughed and liked her comment without thinking. That small moment gave him an idea. Royal Court was destined to obtain admission tickets earlier than most guilds, and Britain needed help more badly than the original story had predicted. Hajin turned to Boss and proposed a partnership. confident that the blue ocean fish would make the negotiation easy. While Hajin prepared his offer, Rachel was discovering how little authority a title meant when an entire country was in crisis. Rachel had become the youngest vice leader in royal court after her predecessor accepted an offer from Korea. The position had been pushed onto her. Along with a national crisis she had never been trained to manage at Cube. Requests for help from foreign guilds led back to the Hero Association. Rachel understood the hidden costs. Once the association entered the negotiations, Britain could lose control over its own territory, dungeons, and political influence. Royal Court therefore invited mercenary groups instead. Rachel endured 13 meetings in one day. Some representatives demanded absurd terms. Some treated the crisis as leverage, and several paid more attention to her appearance than to the monsters threatening British civilians. By the end, only 2 offers seemed remotely usable. Then, her secretary reported that one more mercenary had arrived without an appointment. Rachel nearly ordered him removed, but the visitor was apparently famous. She allowed the meeting, expecting another arrogant negotiator. At that same moment, London was learning exactly why this mercenary's name had become famous. The sirens began in the outer city before anyone understood what was crawling up from beneath the streets. Manholes burst open across a London street. Sea moles, greed toads, giant catfish, and other monsters poured into the crowd. To ordinary civilians, even the lowest-ranked creatures were lethal. A greed toad pinned a woman and opened its mouth. Before it could bite, its head exploded. A sea mole lunged next and died the same way before touching her. Lines of light rained from the sky. Storm of bullets erased hundreds of monsters in 3 minutes, leaving the surviving civilians staring at a single man seated on a motorcycle with his face hidden beneath a helmet. The motorcycle roared away before anyone could approach. Behind him, one witness finally shouted the name everyone recognized. Fenrir! 5 minutes after Rachel's final interview, a black-clad man entered her office. His hair was neatly swept back. A trimmed beard changed the shape of his face, and his calm baritone carried none of the awkwardness she remembered. Rachel froze as recognition struck. Hajin sat across from her as though 3 years had been a brief delay, smiled, and introduced himself with a new identity. I am Fenrir of Jeronimo. Their reunion had barely begun. Elsewhere, the name Black Lotus was becoming the subject of a much more dangerous investigation. On the 101st floor of the Hero Tower, Aileen reviewed everything the association had gathered on Black Lotus. 11 violent incidents in Pandemonium had been tied to him, usually ending with a single arrow and a Black Lotus symbol left behind. The file contained achievements but no identity. Aileen reasoned that an archer capable of controlling that much power was probably using only 20 to 30% of his full output. Her analysts reluctantly calculated what that implied. In raw destructive power, Black Lotus could already stand at master rank hero level. The estimate was theoretical, but it placed him near Jin Sion, the divine archer whose crystal arrow had once defeated a basilisk. Aileen immediately imagined the 2 archers firing at each other, and for reasons she kept to herself, hoped Jin Seon would lose. The association had no answer yet, only a new certainty that Black Lotus was far more dangerous than the report suggested. Back in London, Rachel was trying to understand the man behind the title Fenrir. Rachel had changed during the separation. The softness in her face had matured. Responsibility had left faint shadows beneath her eyes, and even her silence felt more controlled. Yet in front of Hajin, her hands still fidgeted with the computer mouse. Hajin waited to see what she would say. Rachel finally focused on the least important detail possible, his beard. When she admitted that it suited him, he smiled and told her he was planning to shave it anyway. She asked why he had stopped working as a mercenary. Hajin answered that he had been busy elsewhere. For 6 months, he had focused on chameleon troop operations, raiding wealthy Jin, hunting a jewel whale, and destroying organizations in Pandemonium. When Hajin mentioned that they had once promised to work together, Rachel pretended to remember perfectly. He teased her by changing whether that day had been sunny or rainy until she realized he was playing with her and glared at him in embarrassed silence. The awkwardness broke. Hajin stopped joking, placed a contract on the desk, and explained the real reason he had returned. Jeronimo was not offering charity. It was offering Britain a partnership on Hajin's terms. The contract contained only 6 clauses, but every one protected Jeronimo's freedom. Royal Court could not interfere in its operations, and Britain would provide information on every dungeon inside its territory. Any loot recovered by Royal Court had to be disclosed, and Jeronimo would receive the first right to purchase it. In exchange, the mercenary group would help suppress Britain's monster crisis and formally align itself with Royal Court. For Rachel, the difference from the previous meetings was immediate. Hajin wanted access and opportunity, not political control over Britain. The terms were demanding, but they were clear, and they gave Royal Court exactly the independent military strength it lacked. When Hajin said Jeronimo would form an official partnership if she agreed, Rachel's exhaustion disappeared. The single word she repeated was not a question anymore. Partnership. The agreement did more than solve an immediate crisis. It changed Britain's standing almost overnight. News of Royal Court's partnership with Jeronimo spread across the world. Royal Court's value surged, political confidence rose, and Rachel was named the leading successor to the Guildmaster because she had secured the deal. Jeronimo appeared to have 24 members, but most were false identities, and only 5 or 6 were active. That was still enough. In 1 month, Chae Nayun alone destroyed 6 marine monster habitats, after Hajin simply pointed him toward the targets. As the habitats disappeared, the monster population began to fall. Britain stabilized without surrendering control to the Hero Association, and Jeronimo gained access to the information Hajin needed. 1 month later, Hajin and Rachel walked along the English Channel after eliminating a swarm of carnivorous tuna. Hajin had used a heavy machine gun configuration and finished the job in 7 minutes, then casually warned Rachel that he would charge her for the bullets. During the quiet walk, Rachel turned at the wrong moment, and Hajin's raised finger poked her cheek. He immediately pretended nothing had happened and asked whether Royal Court had found any strange paper that looked like a colored admission ticket. Rachel did not remember seeing one. Then Hajin's smartwatch vibrated loudly. The update he had waited 3 years to complete was finally finished. The laptop had not merely returned. It had come back with powers Hajin had never possessed before. The completed update increased Stigma's recovery and granted Hajin 3 variable points. It also added 3 functions: overclocking, which could exchange his vitality for greater Stigma output; device link, which could bind up to 4 electronic devices to his will; and spatial modification, which could alter a limited environment. The update had cost 1,000 SP, leaving him with 3,053. His physical growth from magic dysfunction had reached its limit, while Master Sharpshooter and his other gifts had continued to develop during the 3-year wait. Hajin's first practical test was device link. He connected it to his Augusta Vigilante and silently ordered the motorcycle to come to him. A minute later, the bike drove across the beach by itself. Rachel grabbed his arm and drew Gallatin, convinced an invisible assassin was controlling the vehicle. Her reaction was immediate and lethal, revealing how many assassination attempts she must have survived during the last 3 years. Hajin explained that the motorcycle was self-driving and ordered it to circle them. Rachel stared in stunned embarrassment, while he advised her not to fall too far behind modern technology. A phone call rescued Rachel from the moment. When she returned, her expression was serious. Royal Court had just recovered several strange papers from a dungeon. 1 week later, those tickets were no longer the only sign that the next era had begun. Yoo Yeonha arrived at a luxury yacht on the Han River for a noble society gathering. The group she had once created for amusement now contained more than 200 future leaders drawn from powerful families, universities, guilds, and government circles. Chae Nayun had arrived early and was leaning over the rail with suspicious intensity. When Yoonhee approached, Nayun hurriedly shut off her smartwatch. Yoo Yeonha needed only a moment to discover what she had been doing. Under a low-ranked Violet Banquet account, Nayun had requested a background check on Kim Hajin and his current location. Yeonha already knew the rumors and knew Nayun had been cheated several times while trying to buy the same information. Rather than confront her, Yeonha led Nayun into a private game room. There she explained the new title printed on Nayun's card. Executor, the highest rank in Yeonha's independent hero classification and a title usually reserved for team leaders. Kim Suho, Shin Jonghak, and Yoo Yeonha soon arrived. Jonghak tried to greet Nayun with solemn emotion and was rewarded with an insult. Yeonha collapsed onto the sofa complaining about Sacred Grace's workload, while Suho reminded him that the salary had already paid for the Lamborghini he wanted. The old cadet slipped into familiar arguments as if Cube had never ended. Nayun and Jonghak even planned a sparring match. Then the television interrupted them with an emergency broadcast. A structure larger than any known dungeon had risen from the Atlantic Ocean. The tower had emerged only 8 minutes after a deep-sea earthquake. Violet Banquet had not predicted it. The association could not explain it, and conventional entry appeared impossible because the structure reached too far beneath the ocean. Yoon Sung-ah watched the broadcast and saw more than a threat. A new tower was the one opportunity powerful enough to restore Sacred Grace completely and return the guild to the rank it had once lost. Inside the Chameleon Troop's transformed hideout, Hajin watched the same report with boss Jane Setrin and Chuk Yongyoung. He already knew the tower's name. It was the Tower of Wish, a place built from humanity's hopes, desires, and hatred. Hajin held an orange admission ticket. Every ticket would become a portal on the promised date, July 1st, and new tickets would be issued for a later entry on September 1st. The colors determined the starting advantage. Green allowed the owner to choose a tutorial difficulty. Yellow added food supplies. Orange added a basic weapon. Red allowed one companion to enter beside the owner. But Hajin did not want any of them. He was searching for a black ticket. The black ticket offered fewer comforts and a far more dangerous beginning. Its reward, however, could break the limits of the world outside the tower. A black ticket holder received none of the benefits from the lower colors and was forced into the hardest tutorial. In exchange, the owner gained a free bonus skill, something that did not naturally exist in the outside world. Inside the Tower of Wish, a skill could let a weaker person overcome an impossible opponent or reach a goal that reality would never allow. That made the black ticket less like a disadvantage and more like a VVIP invitation for someone who understood its value. Tickets could appear anywhere, in a sandbox, inside a dungeon chest, or on a monster's corpse. Hajin had also pressured organizations in Pandemonium, promising to reconsider further attacks if they handed over any admission tickets they discovered. Jane was about to say that no useful report had arrived when her smartwatch vibrated. A contact had just sent an image of a newly discovered ticket. She projected the image into the room. The ticket inside the hologram was completely black. Hajin looked at it and smiled. The next major episode had finally begun exactly where he needed it to. 3 years had changed every member of the old Cube generation. Suho and Jonghak had become rising heroes. Yeonha had built an empire of influence. Nayun had returned with strength and resentment intact, and Rachel now carried the future of Britain on her shoulders. Hajin had changed as well. Fenrir was now an international name. Jeronimo had entered the world stage, and the laptop that defined his impossible advantage had finally completed its update. Now the Tower of Wish stood before all of them, and Kim Hajin had found the black ticket that could decide what happened inside.